Sometimes they didn't leave because they stopped loving you. They left because they didn't know how to love you in the first place. Some hearts betray not out of cruelty, but because they haven't yet learned the weight of staying. Welcome to Broken Truth, where love meets lies, and every story reveals the pain behind the smile. Emotional immaturity is one of the silent killers of love. It isn't always about lies or cheating. Sometimes it's about an inability to take responsibility, communicate openly, or hold space for another person's emotions. A partner may betray you not because they planned to, but because when things got too real, too deep, or too vulnerable, they panicked. They chose escape over growth, silence over confrontation, and distraction over intimacy. They weren't ready to be loved the way you were ready to give it. Emotional immaturity turns commitment into pressure. And when love feels like pressure, betrayal becomes the easiest exit. She never asked him to be perfect, just present. But presence for him was never still. It was borrowed, temporary, like sunlight flickering through blinds on a cloudy day. There, then not. And she, in all her softness, kept holding her breath every time he came close, hoping this time he would stay long enough to feel her exhale. At first, it felt like timing, life pulling them in different directions. Work, stress, past wounds, all the usual explanations lovers whisper to themselves when something feels slightly off but not broken. But love isn't supposed to feel like walking on eggshells while pretending you're dancing. And deep down, her soul knew something wasn't growing. Something was avoiding light. He was kind. The type of kind that doesn't break things, just leaves them behind quietly. The type that kisses your forehead but won't look you in the eye when you say, "I need you." He made her laugh, but never listened when she cried. He stayed up late with her, but only in the moments that didn't require depth. Every time she opened her heart a little more, he'd shift the topic, make a joke, pour a drink, check his phone. She mistook his inability to meet her depth as mystery. She thought maybe if she was more patient, more understanding, he'd eventually feel safe enough to meet her halfway. But you can't meet someone halfway when they haven't even chosen the same road. And love isn't built by standing still while someone else runs from themselves. The cracks weren't sudden, they were slow, like water seeping into the edges of a painting until the whole canvas fades. He began disappearing in the small moments. The check-in text became one-word replies. The warmth in his voice turned into routine politeness. The way he once held her like the world would end if he let go now felt like a habitual grip with no meaning left, and still she stayed. Because she loved the version of him she saw in the quiet. The one that surfaced in rare moments when he let his guard down, when he looked at her like he remembered who he could be if only he tried. But those glimpses faded fast like dreams after waking. He didn't know how to stay there. Maybe he never wanted to. She remembered the last real conversation they had, not the surface talks or the "how was" your day exchanges, but the one where she told him, "I feel alone even when I'm with you." And he just looked at her blank, like she'd spoken a language he hadn't learned yet. He didn't argue, didn't comfort, just said, "I don't know what to do with that." As if her feelings were a puzzle he didn't have the patience to solve. When he finally left, it wasn't explosive. It wasn't dramatic, it was quiet, unceremonious. A message about needing space. A slow fading out like the end of a song no one remembered playing. He left behind a few hoodies, a toothbrush, and a version of herself that had been waiting too. Long for someone who never planned to arrive. She didn't scream, didn't chase, didn't beg him to stay. She just stood in the silence of his absence, realizing it had been louder than his presence ever was. The grief wasn't just about him. It was about everything she gave without receiving, the emotional intimacy she built brick by brick, hoping he'd eventually add a wall. The way she bent around his wounds, tiptoed around his discomfort, made herself small so he wouldn't feel overwhelmed. But no matter how small she became, he still felt suffocated. Because emotional immaturity doesn't recognize love, it only feels pressure, and the moment love asks for accountability, the immature mistake it for control. He didn't cheat with someone else. He cheated her of the emotional safety she kept offering. He couldn't hold what he hadn't learned to value. And she finally understood. Some people don't break your heart. They just never knew how to hold it in the first place. She sat in that truth like a wound she was finally brave enough to stop covering. It stung deeply, but it also stopped bleeding, because the saddest thing isn't being unloved. It's being loved by someone who never really knew how. She didn't heal all at once. That would have been too easy, too neat for the kind of ache he left behind. Some mornings she woke up forgetting he was gone. Other mornings she remembered too quickly and sat with the weight of it in her chest like something she had to carry just to prove it ever mattered. There were days she questioned everything. Was she too much? Too emotional? Too serious? Was it her fault for wanting depth, for craving connection that went past laughter and comfort? But in time, those questions began to soften. She started realizing it wasn't about blame. It was about truth, and the truth was she had loved someone who wasn't ready to be loved the way she offered. She gave presents to someone who only knew how to disappear. She handed over her hurt, hoping he'd grow into the man who could carry it. But growth has to be chosen, not waited. So she began unlearning the version of love she had clung to. She stopped romanticizing effort that didn't go both ways. She no longer saw silence as mystery, but as a lack of care. She started seeing his, I don't know, not as honesty, but as avoidance. And most importantly, she stopped seeing his inability to show up as a reflection of her worth. She cried, still often, but the tears weren't always for him. They were for the version of herself that kept shrinking to make room for his comfort, for all the ways she held his pain while ignoring her own, for the time she thought waiting was loyalty instead of quiet self-abandonment. And in the stillness of that grief, she started to build, not walls, not bitterness, but doors, soft boundaries that said, if you want to come in, you have to know how to treat what's inside. She stopped answering late-night messages from people who only remembered her when they felt lonely. She began paying attention to how she felt after conversations, not just how much effort she gave to make them feel good. She forgave herself, not for being too emotional, but for calling it love when it was really just emotional labor in disguise. She learned that love isn't about fixing someone. It's about choosing someone who meets you in the middle, with their own toolbox, ready to build something that can hold both of you. She began choosing herself in small, everyday ways, saying no without guilt, asking for clarity instead of sitting in confusion, letting go of people who made her feel hard to love. And most beautifully, she stopped fearing her sensitivity. She saw it not as weakness, but as a kind of strength not everyone knows how to receive. Love, she realized, shouldn't feel like convincing someone to stay. It should feel like finally being met without shrinking, and when someone new appeared, with slower steps, but steadier eyes. She didn't rush. She didn't offer everything at once, but she also didn't shut down, because now she knew healing isn't about guarding your heart like a prison. It's about knowing your heart is a home and only leaving the door open for those who knock with care and walk in without wrecking the furniture. Some betrayals happen not out of bad intent, but out of unreadiness. But healing begins when you stop waiting for the version of them that never arrived. If this story echoed something you felt, but never said aloud, you're not alone. Subscribe for more untold truths, only on Broken Truth.